Right, and let's get started. My name is Victoria Cacciatore, and I'm a transportation analyst at the Sacramento Area Council of Governments. I'm also the project manager for the Sacramento Region Trails, or Parks and Trails Strategic Development Plan. A couple of meeting participation tips. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the SACOG website following the meeting. You can submit questions during the webinar using either the chat feature or the Q&A feature. Those are icons in your lower menu. We will have 3 different parts where throughout the presentation we pause to take questions about either the content that was just presented or broader questions that you may have about the webinar. A little bit about SACOG. The Sacramento Area Council of Governments is an association of local governments in the 6-county Sacramento region. Its members include the counties of Eldorado, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba, as well as the 22 cities within those 6 counties. You'll note that for Eldorado and Placer, we are talking about the western slope. At SACOG, we serve our cities and counties in a number of ways, including assisting with planning for transit, clean air, and the topic of today, biking and walking networks through trails. I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to the SACOG team that is responsible for the data development, research, analysis, and coordination going on throughout the region to develop the plan so far. Many of us are on the line today, and if you have any questions about anything, please contact me directly and then I will direct you to the appropriate team member for any further questions. So over today's webinar, so between now and 3 o'clock, we're going to cover an overview of the plan, identify some information about who has access through the existing trail network, what we've learned about local goals and destinations, and then also what we've heard from our project partners earlier this summer. So to kick off with the plan overview, what we are working towards is a connected trail network that is going to increase access to open space for all of our residents, including those areas that historically have had lower levels of investment and where residents shoulder the negative impact of environmental conditions and systemic racism. We know that we can use these connections through trails to increase physical and mental health, as well as create options for safer biking and walking trips. We know that where trails connect, supportive businesses can open to meet the needs of people who want to bike and walk more, whether they are creating volunteer-operated bike repair shops that can serve as the training grounds for future bike shop owners, or whether it's the homegrown businesses that rent out bikes to visitors who are exploring our region. We also know that communities can rally around the new opportunities created by these connections, as your local trail can become a point of pride and what you want to show off to your friend from out of town. So what compels us to build trails in the region? We know that there is a strong potential for how trails can contribute to a regional greenhouse gas reduction strategy. So what can they do to increase the safe, active transportation connections? How do they support fewer trips by car? And how do they increase access to jobs or businesses? Stepping back a little further, you can hear about how people feel that trails support the economy. Is this something that can attract tourists to the region if you're looking to expand that economy? Is it a way to reduce brain drain by creating economic opportunities for people to stay in the community where they grew up? Is it through designing a more inclusive economy that addresses racial and income-based disparities? And then stepping back one more step, getting to that 30,000-foot level, you come to see that the creation of trails is actually a great way to strengthen our communities. It can improve our health by proactively addressing social determinants of health that today create disparities that we see throughout the current pandemic, and then also health conditions throughout our region. It can increase access to green space for many people. It's an amenity for our residents, and it helps define our region through place-based transportation. All of these things that together support an increased quality of life in the region. Right now, cities and counties are doing that one grueling project at a time. And we celebrate every time a community can go from this eyesore and into this community building asset. But we also want to more consciously design how we connect and grow our trail network so it can benefit the 2 million people that live here, as well as visitors and even future residents. It's how we can pursue an economy by design instead of settling for an economy by default. And through the Regional Parks and Trails Development Plan, we are setting out to identify our region's unifying vision for making trail connections and to identify what is standing in the way of us getting there. So let me tell you a little bit about our existing trail network. So throughout the 6 counties that are in the SACOG region, we have just under 500 miles of Class 1 trails. That's going to be a trail like what you see pictured here from the American River Parkway. It's going to be of a Caltrans designated width and surface and meets specific design standards to that effect. There's also slightly over 60 miles worth of informal trails that can also serve as connections for communities and increase access to open space. Part of this great head start is due to the past inspiring visions of dreamers and implementers. And you'll see that over half of the existing trails that we have on the ground are in one form of parks and open space or another. These are trails connecting and passing through green spaces in our region and providing comfortable connections that can be used to get you to your needed destination. You will see that there is a dearth of existing trails in and along flood control and water management areas. And you'll hear a little bit more about that later as we note that most of the places that are prioritized in local planning efforts are actually along or using bodies of water as the primary destination. When we're discussing who has access and who does not have access to trails, we also wanted to take a focused look on the disadvantaged communities within our region, because we know that our region houses many different residents who experience different life conditions daily. For a starting point on that analysis, we used the regional definition that was developed for our long-range transportation plan. In that, we identified census block groups where 45% or more of the households earn less than 2,000 or 200% of the federal poverty level. Also block groups where the community of color population is 70% or higher, using CalEnviroScreen 3.0 measures, and then also identifying areas where there was a concentration of other vulnerabilities that could make it to where you may have a harder daily life experience, such as where there are concentrations of linguistically isolated households, concentrations of single parent households with children under the age 18, and so on. When we're talking about access to trails, we are using a half-mile trail shed for the analysis. So is your place of residence located within a half-mile or closer of an existing trail? When we're looking at that, we see that from that existing trail network, so the almost 500 miles of Class 1, what you typically think of when you think of a trail for biking or walking in the region, less than half of our region lives within a half mile of an existing trail. Similarly, less than half of the region's jobs are within a half mile of the trail. And with the focused look on what does access look like if you are living in a disadvantaged community, 25% of the trails are located in disadvantaged communities, and that's compared to 37% of the population that is living in one of those areas defined through the regional environmental justice analysis. However, we also saw that from that almost 500 miles of trails, there's a lot that were very small. They're less than a half mile long. And when you're looking at how you might be able to use a trip or a trail for either exercise, so whether you're going to go out for a walk for 20 minutes, or if you're trying to connect to any destinations, these trails are going to be falling short of making the connections that you need. It might be, like, one example would be a trail that is from a parking lot of a park and into the playground that's there. So if we take a more focused look at where are the trails that are going to be a half mile or longer, we do see a slightly different picture of access. We see that there is a significant decrease in the number of dwelling units that are near the existing trails, 67,000 fewer households. There's over 100,000 fewer jobs that are near these trails, and about the same number that are still located in our disadvantaged communities at the regional level. We wanted to understand a little bit more about what these conditions are on the ground, though, so we decided to, from that more region-looking definition, what happens if you are to take a harder look at the areas where people are earning less than 200% of the federal poverty level. So for a household of four, that would be less than $54,000 a year. And with that and how it can overlap with other metrics that are identified in that environmental justice community, what does access look like? And we found that when you are looking at these day-to-day conditions of not having enough money to meet all of your needs, you are also less likely to have one of those longer trails by you. Only 45% of non-disadvantaged community residents can access longer trails, and a full 10% fewer, 35% of disadvantaged community residents can access those longer trails. So with that, I'd like to take our first pause to see if there are any questions, and I'll turn it over to Rosie at this time.
Hi. So we do have a couple of questions, and I will read them out, and then Victoria or Destin will go ahead and answer the questions. The first one that we got was, can you define informal trails?
Yes, the informal trail is something that we were looking to capture this time because not everything is built to Caltrans standards, and it takes a lot of different shapes. In some instances, it could be that you still have a paved trail, but it's too close to a roadway to meet the Caltrans design criteria for being a trail. So they do capture a number of different types of trails. Sometimes it's just too narrow. Other times it's that it's more of a gravel trail, almost like a dirt bike type trail or mountain biking trail, where it doesn't really make a lot of sense to pave it because it would detract from the quality of your experience with the environment, but it might also still serve as connections or get you to that larger trail network.
Great, thank you. The next one is a map. Is there a map of existing trails?
There's a map of existing trails that is on the SACOG website for this project. It has a lot of other information on it as well, but you can see both the existing and the planned trails on that map. And we will be, Rosie, if you could find and send that out through the chat, the web address, that would be great.
I'll post it up in a minute. The next question is a little bit more specific, but can you help work with Union Pacific to make trails or bikeways from an unused railroad to a walking, biking, and park-like area?
I feel like somebody took a look at our slide deck already. That is one of the things that we are looking at as something that could come from this regional plan coordination. There are examples of that in other regions where there's an MOU with UP, and whenever there's something for how you can build out part of a regional trail network, and there's a discussion with UP, perhaps it could be a bit more of bringing something that UP wants to the table at the same time, such as if they are looking at changes to another crossing of their rail network or something to that effect. But that is something that we're pursuing.
And then one more question, is mileage to trail measured by road or as a crow flies?
For the purpose of looking at the trail shed, it is as the crow flies, although there is, for some of the different metrics, it is using the existing road network and connections that can be made. So it's a difference in analysis techniques, but when we're talking about the 35% of disadvantaged community residents, that is looking at where you can access the trail and not just on a as the crow flies, whereas the number of dwelling units within the shed or trail shed is as the crow flies.
That's all the questions I'm seeing right now, but if anyone else has more questions, please feel free to type them in and then we'll just answer them verbally in the next section.
All right, do I see another question there?
Yeah, and I'll take that, or well, actually, I think, Rosie, if there's time, and then Dustin will be sharing the screen while I check on that.
Great. All right. All right, can everyone see my screen? All right, great. So please excuse the view of my home office. My colleagues here have their well-designed SACOG branded virtual background. Anyways, thank you, Victoria. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. The SACOG team, we spent the last several months reviewing state, local, and regional plans to learn the goals that guide active transportation and trail planning, and to identify community destinations and key regional destinations that members of our communities want to access. So we're going to share our review findings with you and just kind of let you know some of the information that we received in TACs previously. All right, so what did we review in total? So far, we've reviewed about 78 plans in the region. These are made up of general plans. We've reviewed every general plan in the region, all the cities and counties. We have a number of active transportation and park plans. These include bike plans, pedestrian plans, complete streets plans, active transportation plans, and trail plans at the local level, the city level. We're also starting to look into climate plans. We've looked at 2 in the region. This was recommended at a recent TAC. We've got maybe another 10 to add to this analysis. And then finally, we've looked at 11 regional trails plans. And those are more at the regional level, such as the California Delta Trail or the American River Parkway that a number of agencies across the region would have adopted. So some more detail into what we reviewed. For general plans, we mainly looked into the introduction chapter, circulation elements, and open space elements. For active transportation plans, kind of went over it, bike, ped, trails, things like that. Mostly our analysis, was done over the last couple of months. A lot of these documents could have some related goals in other parts of the general plan, for instance. So that's kind of a limitation or a disclaimer for everybody. But for both types of these plans, we looked at mission language, goals, policy chapters. We looked for references to active transportation networks, trails, and potential destinations in the community and region. We also, looking at the regional trail plans, we did look at the mission and the opportunities and proposed trail segments, but for the most part, our analysis that will follow will mostly look at the general plan and active transportation plan findings because it's at a different scale of analysis. So the general plans and local active transportation plans are at one jurisdiction level. Regional trail plans often include a number of different agencies. So maybe we can try something in the chat, do a little call and response, give you a couple seconds. So, after we've conducted our review, which goals do you think inform our planning for trails, for active transportation? And I can't see the chat pod, so if there's anyone monitoring the chat, feel free to say a few things if anyone's adding anything in. Pause for a few more seconds. All right, is there anything in the chat pod?
There is a question, Dustin.
Oh, there's a question. No,
yeah.
Okay.
When will the American River Parkway trail under Hazel Avenue that has been closed due to the construction of a fish channel or at the fish hatchery been rebuilt?
That's a great question. We'll have to get back to you on that. All right, no goals. All right. So here are the goals that we found, looking at all of the different plans that we analyzed. All these goals really cut across state, regional, and local priorities in general plans, state plans, active transportation plans. And many of these are connected. You can see a strong connection between safety and all ages and abilities, environmental justice and health, also health and recreation, so on and so forth. So it's good to see, kind of all these things together. But we wanted to focus a little bit more on environmental justice goals. We identified a number of agencies across the region who have identified goals, policies, active transportation project prioritization criteria, purpose statements, or even equity analyses in some of these plans. But there's SB 1000 that requires local agencies to include an environmental justice element or related goals, policies, and objectives in other elements throughout their general plan. So we're going to see a lot more agencies in the near future adopt goals related to environmental justice. So, we looked at these plans through the lens of our 2020 MTP SCS environmental justice areas. And, we kind of looked at the policies that were in line with the criteria thresholds that Victoria had discussed earlier around low income, race, age, linguistic separation, education, pollution, vulnerability. So we identified a number of different ways that we can touch on environmental justice in a lot of different contexts. At least 4 SACOG agencies thus far have adopted language in their general plans or will include it in a forthcoming update. City of Sacramento will include the element in their forthcoming general plan 2040. And a lot of them, they discuss environmental justice in relation to reducing health disparities, developing healthy communities, and even stating a direct linkage between environmental equity, health, and active transportation access and connectivity to open space. So, we see this trail plan as offering an opportunity to work with our agencies and communities to increase access and reduce disparities for people who have been historically disadvantaged. Really to fundamentally improve the lives of people, whether it's a senior on a mobility device who wants to enjoy their local park, or a young person of color who wants to walk to school. We want to provide those opportunities to everybody in an equitable way. So moving on to more destination related aspirations, we found connectivity to a lot of community destinations, but also parks and open space was a number of agencies across the region really want to connect to parks, streams, creeks, rivers, bodies of water. More specifics on that in the next slide. But it's important to note that these destinations aren't just for recreation, but there's also a strong transportation need for a lot of these, whether regional connectivity can assist connections for commuters or other purposes, more longer distance trips, but also looking at the more community-based potential utilitarian trips around shopping, getting students to school or other community institutions like libraries, and also connecting to transit. So looking at some specific connection points that we found in a number of different agencies. So we're depicting the number of SACOG jurisdictions that specifically adopted policy goals around connecting to these different destinations. And as you can see, a lot of them are rivers and lakes. Of course, connecting to the water, there's a lot of great livability benefits, health benefits, just general enjoyment that our region has really benefited greatly from this access, and obviously we want it to increase. So just to wrap up some overall findings from the review of these 78 plans, active transportation and access to parks and open space is one of the most important goals as identified in these plans. We identified that trail networks can serve both recreational but also utilitarian travel purposes. There's an overwhelming interest in connecting to the region, coordinating with a nearby jurisdiction. And finally, safety and comfort for all people walking and biking is a priority. We talk about the concept of all ages and abilities. And, this picture here really sums it up for us. Our partners up in Eldorado County developed a great project, Eldorado Trail. Here we have a family, a young child as a part of a family enjoying that trail near Missouri Flat. So kudos to them and kudos to all of our partners working on this project. So with that, I think we'll pause for questions and answers.
Okay, so we have a couple of comments on goals, adding to incorporate multimodal access points as a goal, connectivity. And there was a question regarding the goals. Was VMT reduction considered as a goal?
Yeah, if I can jump in and take the first pass at that, and then Dustin, you can add on based on your in-depth experience with all the local plans, is that didn't so much see VMT reduction or vehicle miles traveled reduction called out as a goal within itself in local planning documents, though that would be a natural outcome of what they were prioritizing, such as creating connections to schools, to shopping centers, or to other destinations where right now your only option may be to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, definitely I would agree that it was kind of an inferred outcome of developing the network in and of itself. There were a few agencies with specific VMT or mode shift goals that were, a little bit more quantitative that we have looked at. So.
Another question, in attempting to address environmental issues of auto pollution and improving population health, how do you engage employers to provide facilities or bike cages to encourage commuting?
For employer engagement, we as SACOG would normally work with transportation management agencies as a partner. And they do a lot of the direct engagement with employers about what it would take to add those facilities, but can definitely add this as a comment for consideration when you're looking at a trail that is going to increase access to employment centers.
One more. In areas in the 80 Watt district, I-80 and Watt Avenue, which is under environmental justice, we're thrilled to bring a project into the area. However, it's on the corridor, busy Watt Avenue. Are you planning ways to slow the traffic down in the project?
No, I would have to look into that specific project a bit more because I'm not familiar with any specific efforts on a SACOG involvement with slowing traffic down on that. So I would have to get back with you.
Will the SACOG plan specifically incorporate unpaved trails?
Yes, it is something that we're looking at about where kind of like what we'd mentioned with the informal trail connections, that sometimes a paved trail is not going to be the most relevant treatment to offer in an area, and it may actually decrease the quality of a person's experience with the area to have it paved. And also there are some areas where it's not going to be feasible to pave either because of the environmental impacts of trying to go in there to put down a paved trail, or it not meeting the needs of the community that it would be serving.
And one more question. Are there opportunities to expedite implementation in light of COVID?
For projects that do have funding guaranteed, and by guaranteed, I mean they have secured the funding either through competitive sources or they already had it budgeted in their local accounts. I think that many agencies are looking at how they can shuffle around their project load and get more trails on the ground. For the purpose of this project, we are looking at how we can still identify the regional trail network and find ways to advance those projects that are ready to move to the next step of applying for funding, securing funding, and what data can we offer at the SACOG level, and the support for getting projects to the next step, whichever next step that is for them, because there are some where it may be an identified area of need, but they haven't started the community engagement yet. So with an upcoming funding round at the SACOG regional level, both for the 6-county active transportation program and then also the 4-county funding programs, I'd say that there are a variety of different opportunities at the regional level and also the state level that SACOG would work with you in support of different projects.
One more. Actually, we wanted to go back to a previous question that we got right at the end of the last Q&A session. One of the slides showed 0% of trails on flood protection projects. Aren't there existing trails on levees?
Our analysis is done on what local agencies, so cities and counties, said are trails that they promote for use. And so if there's something, in some instances, there are trails that might be considered to be on that, but it's also been turned into a linear park. So it no longer counts under the land use of flood control or a flood management area. So there are some instances of that, but I would say that at an even like more commonly throughout the region, the use of levee tops for trails are not promoted, and in some places not actually sanctioned. So it's something that you will not hear from a local city or a county that this is a trail that they promote using, but people just so happen to go out there and use the levee top for biking, for running, for taking their dog out, or for what as a way to access rivers. And that is why it says 0, but it's actually that it was less than 0.5%, so it rounded down. There are a small handful of those that are on the flood control areas in the region.
And actually, one more question. When upgrading a trail, how are you handling the homeless camping laws so that the public is able to use without causing grief for either side?
I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there are a lot of unhoused people in the region, and it is something that is a very challenging situation, and it's not purely within one regional planning effort to address that and to figure out, but it is something that each agency is undertaking, and I think that there are different ways for all of us to learn from each other's experiences on how to address people who are experiencing homelessness with dignity.
And I think I missed one more question. Will the SACOG plan specifically incorporate unpaid trails? As I'm sure there's a lot that exists, more than 60 miles of trails in the 6-county region, but many more legitimate recreational trails and informal.
Yes, I think that there is the potential for that, especially in areas where it doesn't suit the area to be a paved trail. Not everything is going to be the American River Parkway with paved surfaces, because that doesn't suit everywhere in the region. But when we are looking at places that might be able to create the access that you need to get to your everyday destinations, it might be that is where you're going to more look at how can you make this a trail that is going to be accessible by people of all different abilities.
I think that's all the questions we have for now. Thank you.
Hey, Victoria.
Yes.
Perfect.
Got it. Over the summer, we talked with cities and counties and community group partners and other people that are interested in how we can improve our region to gain a better understanding of what the on-the-ground conditions are for trails and for open space connections. We wanted to hear more about where are the opportunities and also where is there more work to be done.
So I think I'll take this slide. I'll be Mr. Positive, and Victoria will be the realistic one to talk about challenges in the next slide. So, thinking about, kind of a lot of the aspirations that our TAC members shared with us over the last, over the summer, one of the big messages we received from many of them is, well, we're calling it Meet the Moment. And if anyone's been listening to our governor's daily or weekly press briefings, it's something he said a lot, right? About as a state, really, doing what's right to ensure that we're responding to these crises that are happening right now. So a lot of our TAC members, although safety is always the top priority when it comes to transportation planning, at least currently, they, during this time, there's a lot of support for environmental justice economic vitality and health as it relates to COVID-19 recovery, the impacts, the many public health impacts, the environmental, the economic impacts, as well as a lot of the social movements that we've seen rise up lately. There's a lot of folks, moving on to economic vitality, a lot of support for thinking about our trail networks in the many multifaceted ways that it can improve our economy for everybody, residents, employees, businesses, and tourists. For a lot of our communities, especially a lot of our rural communities, there's an interest in bringing people in, bringing people into the town to enjoy parks, to enjoy Main Street, things like that. So, creating an attractive environment for potential businesses, supporting affordable transportation, encouraging tourism, retaining talent, providing access to jobs and schools, all things very important to our TAC members. We heard a lot of interest in and further connecting to our regional connections, connecting to parks, open space, bodies of water. This was a big priority for many of our attendees. Some folks said that water is an economic engine for our region. A lot of discussion of getting folks up to the Sutter Buttes, but also just a lot of discussion about getting folks to their community level parks with a trail network. And finally, a lot of discussion on this topic of all ages and abilities. A lot of folks stated that this plan is an opportunity to really rethink auto trips in favor of biking or walking. And a lot of discussion that, although this is a trail plan, on-road networks, like class 4 separated bikeways or bike boulevards, things like that, should and must complement the trail network, could serve as gap-filling opportunities to expand access to the trail system to get into certain communities that may not have that access today. And finally, when we think about safety, we talk about crash risk, but we also want to talk about perceived safety, feeling comfortable on a facility and perhaps separate from high vehicle volumes or high vehicle speeds. So really providing all ages friendly, family friendly trail network throughout the region is a big goal. And with that, Victoria, feel free to talk about some of the challenges that we'll face.
Of course. We heard also a lot about the challenges that our local agencies are facing. Specifically that if you're looking at any project that is going to recommend a trail through a residential area, that there needs to be meaningful community engagement that directly affects the project development and the final recommendations. Our cities and counties need to develop the trust with the communities that they serve and address those community needs. And what can we do to build community support of a project that can then turn into community ownership? So the people that are living there know that this trail is being built for them and not an improvement that's made for somebody else who will be there later. We also heard a lot about the challenges of working with other institutions that control the right-of-way, hinder an agency's ability to develop a corridor into a community asset. We heard a lot about infrastructure barriers, how freeways, rivers, or even just a lack of access points all serve to dissuade people or to eliminate access to our existing trail networks. People are shelving projects or never picked them up in the first place because they thought that they were too expensive to manage on their own, even if there were going to be great benefits. And another thing that we heard a lot is that there are often trails included with new developments, and those trails are often thought about how they connect within that development itself, but they don't identify how it's going to feed into the much larger trail network. And this is going to this undermines the potential for biking and walking trips to the store or to other destinations that are geographically quite close, but you have to travel a completely circuitous route to be able to bike or walk there. And very importantly, we heard loud and clear, trails are not cheap. There's often a misconception that a trail is smaller, it's easier to build, and that it should just be managed no problem. So we took a sampling of 5 different trails that are coming online in the next couple of years. These are projects that have secured funding and should be able to construct soon. It's 11 miles of new trail. There's 1 freeway overcrossing of a trail. And for these, it's $53 million. And so that is not chump change. That is a lot of money. And that is not something that's going to change. Building costs escalate every year. But it's also worth noting that along with building costs, there's also changing conditions for trails that we need to think about. At the state and regional level, especially through the Active Transportation Program, you have competitive funding sources that prioritize investments in marginalized communities. You have national groups and also SACOG and locals developing better data that can support trail expansions and quantify the benefits of the connection you're making. And as Dustin was saying, the increased interest in trails as part of an all ages, all abilities network. And there's also a growing partnership with public health as there is more and more evidence about not only the physical benefits of trails, but the mental benefits that you can get. And so then when you think about this changing environment and especially the better data in support of expanding trails, what does that 53 million that we mentioned for that 11 miles of trails get you? And I'd like to note that 19 million of that is from state funding that would have not otherwise come to the region. So looking at the network of trails that are 0.5 miles or longer, we have new access for 15,000 households. We have new access for 11,000 more jobs. And you have improved access for 20,000 more people who are living in disadvantaged communities, strengthening their active modes connections to existing trails, parks, schools, all of the places that we know form a strong neighborhood. And it's also worth noting, what else could you possibly get with 53 million? Well, that is also roughly the cost of your new freeway interchange. They're sometimes more, sometimes less. But it is important to look at what are the benefits that we get from aggregating these trail connections, and how can we use this type of information to more deliberately grow our trail network. When you can see all these benefits, it's clear that we need to come together as a region and not just view these as challenges, but how can we turn them into our opportunities? What can we do to develop a regional approach to working with Union Pacific and maybe streamline how we can utilize rail corridors for development of a regional trail network? How can we work with local agencies and community groups to work with their residents? How can we leverage the existing network in support of more biking and walking trips? And how can we demonstrate that sometimes, even if there is a high cost for crossing a barrier like a freeway or a river, building a bridge across that the costs are far outweighed by the benefits? And with that, I wanted to stop for our questions and answers.
Okay, I have a couple. First one, is there a policy being promoted for e-bikes?
At the SACOG level, there's not something directly about e-bikes as a standalone policy, but it is being addressed in the context of our larger biking improvements in the planning context. I would say that there's also possibly some relation to that and how we as a region pursue electrification of vehicles and the different sorts of increased access that electric bikes can provide to somebody who, you know, if you're just left with your standard bike, may not consider riding, you know, 4 miles to get to the grocery store. But with an e-bike, it becomes not only easier, it actually becomes fun.
Are you using local businesses to do these projects, and or will you use a certain vendor? How can we help you connect with local businesses?
For connecting with local businesses, right now we are trying to make a lot of the connections to find out what's important to people at the local level. And local businesses are included in that. What is going to be important about how people access their business. From our city partners and county partners, we have heard some different areas that areas where they're working with business districts to increase biking and walking access to there, such as one of the ones off the top of my head is we heard from Galt how they really want to be able to encourage more biking walking access to Old Town Galt because they have very constrained parking options there. They do want to have more people biking and walking there. So if there is somebody that either an organization, like a business district or otherwise possibly interested business, please let us know who that is and we could reach out to them and also work with our local city or county partner based on wherever that business is situated.
How can we make the general public aware of the trails and the benefits the trails provide to the general public?
We are hoping that through the creation of this plan, we'll be able to generate some ready-to-go resources that would talk about what the benefits of a connected trail network in our region are that are specific to our region. So something that could be almost more of a go-to handout for when you're looking to have these conversations, but that'll just be part of it. Whenever you're talking about how to relay benefits of trails, there are always a lot of different tactics for discussing the benefits, and you often have to customize it to that audience based on what is going to speak to them. But we can try to provide some base level of information that people could have at the ready.
And I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment.
Right. So we have our next steps, which is that we are still trying to identify what the different unifying vision is for our region. What is it that a trail network could bring to our region? We developed a survey that we would like for you to fill out just on behalf as a person who has attended this, who has an interest in how we're growing this transportation network through our region. I encourage everybody to share it. We were also going to make this webinar recording posted on our website, so other people who maybe couldn't make it to this webinar at 2 o'clock today, they could watch it later and still fill out the survey in the next couple of weeks and provide their input. And it is a snapshot of, you know, from the different goals that we see rising to the top and local plans, from the different destinations that we see rising to the top and local plans. How do you see a regional trail network fitting into accessing those destinations? How do you see it embodying those goals? And then also an open space for anything else that you want us to consider as we move forward on this project. We'll send out this link by email as a follow-up to the webinar. So don't worry if you didn't get to write it down. And this is roughly a 2-year planning process that we'll be updating our board on shortly in the next month about what we've heard from our city and county partners, and then also what we heard from this webinar and what you're able to provide for us in feedback, and looking at how we can draw all of this into something that the SACOG board could weigh in on, of how do we identify the priorities and outcomes that are most important for identifying a regional trail network. And once we are able to identify that regional trail network, then how do we go about identifying the priority segments that are going to kickstart further development of this trail network? What are the different levers that we can pull to work with partners, such as on levee top improvements? How can we streamline the process for working with UP when you're looking to convert a right-of-way? Are there any prospects for private investment in building out these trails from business partners, from philanthropy? Many of the tools that you see used in other parts of the nation, but not so much in the Sacramento region. And then wrapping up everything by the very beginning of 2022 with implementation strategies for those top tier projects.
Victoria, we had a couple questions come through right now.
All right.
First one is, using Galt as an example, are there funds to provide for bike parking locations that the businesses can tap into?
Often with bike parking, it's included in a larger infrastructure project. Right now, I'm not aware of whether there are still any programs that people can request bike parking from. I know that there had been one through one of our air districts a few years ago, but I'm not sure if it's still in play or not. We can look into if there are different options at local levels that maybe should be promoted.
Regarding the timeline, are you in the beginning or are you already in the 2-year process?
We are still in the first part of the 2-year process. We've had some schedule setbacks actually as we were adapting to COVID and 100% remote work. And what does that mean for a project that originally had expected to be doing some on the ground outreach? So we are still in the first part, but also the first part involved a lot of data gathering. So very early in the outreach.
And then one more, have possible connections to other regions been considered?
Yes. Yes, we've been reaching out to the surrounding regional partners to see what are the options to continue, further north. There are some prior plans that look at what you could do to get over the hill and into Tahoe, and then also Dustin mentioned the Great California Delta Trail that actually connects you into the Bay Area. So we're looking at how we might be able to link up with these plans in a longer term and see what opportunities there are to explore.
And that's all I'm seeing. Thank you.
All right, and that does put us at 3 o'clock. So thank you to everybody who came in and spent an hour with us. We really appreciate you coming in, and please send any follow-up questions to me. If I'm not able to answer it, I will find the best way to deliver that answer to you. And we will have the resources listed in a follow-up email. Thank you, everyone.